Welcome to another edition of Boxing Info. I'm your host, The Islander, and apologies that it's been a week in between doing videos. Just, it's been absolutely hectic. I wanted to cover, and I wrote down a few things I want to cover this week. One is obviously the death of Muhammad Ali, and a proper goodbye to him, because no matter what anybody says, and what I've noticed is on my video, the top 20 greatest boxers of all time, there's all sorts of fighting between what I would call millennials that aren't as astute about the history of the sport and are basically knowledgeable very heavily from the digital era than the film era, and the people who actually have some type of experience, or I should say knowledge of what happened before Mike Tyson. Let's just leave it at that. The first thing I want to go back to, which I forgot to do and neglected on the previous video, is I want to close the book on Floyd Mayweather Jr. because I don't think that I personally have been completely fair to him. And as I was in my absolute disappointment with the Pacquiao fight, and I don't want to spend one iota talking about that, I came to a realization. And I've been saying for years, even more than a decade now, that one of the things that makes Floyd Mayweather Jr. special is that never before in boxing have I seen, maybe some of you have and you can point it out to me, but at least not at the championship level, have I seen a boxer fighter who has had the championship genetic pedigree that he has from his father and his uncle Roger and his uncle Jeff Mayweather, wrapped up in one person and combined with an extraordinary amateur and Olympic pedigree together. Sugar Ray Leonard and Oscar De La Hoya, obviously the amateur background and the Olympic pedigree, and Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier and George Foreman and so on and so forth, Andre Ward. But to have what I call championship quality lineage, and as much as people want to deride Floyd Mayweather Sr., I remember seeing him fight when I was younger. I don't think he ever did get a shot at the world title, but he was, mixing it up with Sugar Ray Leonard and Marlon Starling and, guys who were world champions. And he would be a world champion today in this watered down, crappy 4 or 5 champions per division, 20 weight division world of boxing that we live in. I think Floyd Sr. probably would have won a title at one point, kind of like Donald Curry's brother Bruce Curry eked out a title, what I call a fractional title in the junior welterweight division for a couple of fights back in the 80s. With that said, and there's nothing denying Roger Mayweather's accomplishments. So I think one of the things, I've been saying this for years about Floyd Mayweather, it's one of the things that made him special and made him the special athlete that he was. But after watching the Pacquiao fight one time, and reflecting on his career, I started thinking, it's got to be something more than that. There's something that I'm missing that everybody's been missing. And one thing I've never heard anybody bring up that I finally came to when I was watching him fight Andre Berto is that Floyd Mayweather Jr. and his father and his uncles and everybody around him, his whole team, have created something that we've never seen before. It makes him the special fighter that he is. They have taken, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, because nobody else, this is my original thoughts. Now, I didn't read this anywhere. Somebody may have written it. I don't know. I don't read much about boxing, and I don't watch what a lot of other people say. But I've already wasted 4 minutes on this. What I want to say about him, and this is more my tribute to him, is that I don't think I've ever seen a championship quality boxer ever that has basically employed a style that is really an amateur style, the perfect amateur rule style of boxing in the professional ranks. And I say this, you're thinking I'm absolutely crazy. Think about this. One of the things that got Roger Mayweather in big trouble and got him kicked out of the amateurs was using professional tactics in the amateurs. Back then, and I think now it's still a rule. I don't know. I don't follow amateur boxing. But what I'm saying, there are certain rules where your head cannot be in front of your hands. Like fighters that lead in, like like Chavez and all those guys, they lead in with their heads. Even Mike Tyson. But in the amateurs, back in Roger Mayweather's day anyway, he got basically, one of the reasons he got kicked out of it was for using professional tactics, and one of them was leading with the head. Not that it's dangerous. It's just that it's not. You see these guys, they almost look like they're riding, basically, big choppers or something. Their hands are always in front of the head. They have to be. And if you look at Floyd Mayweather, whether he's fighting somebody taller or shorter, his hands are always his first line of defense before his head moves. And the thing was, his head never got ahead of his gloves. Even when he was fighting Jose Luis Castillo or Marcos Maidana, guys who were putting immense pressure, or Ricky Hatton, his head was always behind his gloves, in the perfect, what I would call, amateur style. Now, obviously he didn't stick to all the amateur rules, but that was one of the core amateur concepts that basically kept him being one of the best defensive fighters of all time. Right up there with the Pernell Whitaker and the Nicolino Loches and Willie Peps of the world. Look back at his fights, whether it's against Diego Corrales, whether it's against Oscar De La Hoya. Whenever he's pressed on the ropes, his head is never, even against somebody like Jesus Chavez, where the fighting was in close, he kept his head behind his hands, and that is one of the cardinal rules. It was back away when in amateur boxing. Nobody has ever blended what I call the perfect amateur style into the pros. You've seen what I call the stick up the butt, old style European Eastern Bloc fighters who fought straight up and down and jab, right hand, and they fought like that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about being in what some of you call the Philly shell, or in some defensive posture on the ropes. Head never got in front of the hands. That's what kept him safe all these years. And he was, fighters pull back. Muhammad Ali was a lot the same way, where he would lean straight back. But again, his hands were up, and he was always behind his hands. It wasn't until later in his career he was leaning in with Frazier getting his chest, and his head was poking above his hands and things like that. I just want to close the book on Mayweather and really say, if you're looking for the key to why he was so successful, I believe it's because nobody has ever employed this strict amateur rule or tactic in the professional ranks as successfully and mastered it as successfully. He still slipped and ducked and parried punches and blocked punches, but you watch him when he's doing that tap thing with Roger Mayweather in the gym. It's all predicated on his head always being back behind his arms and his hands. And we'll close the book on that. You could agree or disagree. I just had to get that out because it needs to be noted. It's not me deriding him. It's me applauding him for doing something so unique that has carried him to 49-0 and a spectacular, the richest career ever. All right, next up, as most of you know, Fair Always was the first to post on one of my videos or my whatever you want to call it, the channel comments, which YouTube has managed to F up pretty good. Muhammad Ali passed away. And, the news was that he was being brought into the hospital for respiratory illness. I think it was on Friday. And that made big news. And everybody's saying, no, it's just a precaution. He's fine, this and that, blah, blah. 24 hours later, he's dead. Now, I think what was really happening is that his advanced illness was being kept under wraps all these years, because I remember my late mother, saying she always wanted to move to Arizona because the air was so dry, and people who had respiratory issues and things usually go to a very dry climate like Arizona. I've been there once, and it could be 120 degrees outside. If you walk in the shade, the temperature drops 30 degrees. That's how dry the air is. And he must have been suffering for a while. And I just want to say this about him. We just got done finished with Floyd Mayweather, probably one of the most polarizing figures in boxing in the past generation or two. And Muhammad Ali was probably one of what I would call the first of the golden age of boxing, polarizing figures. You go way back to Jack Johnson, who was definitely a polarizing figure. But Muhammad Ali absolutely was a polarizing figure. I was, probably too young to really watch and understand his fights until I watched him in backwards, like most millennials do, and think Mike Tyson can walk on water today. Same thing. And I've got nothing but good things to say about him, and happy that we got to watch him, got to see him, got to learn from him, both inside the ring and outside the ring, because I think that he took his political stands, whether it was against the Vietnam War, his change of faith to Muslim, and that's another thing that's kind of dividing the country right now, is this in the United States I'm speaking about, and Europe is suffering from a lot of this Islamic refugee immigration and things like that. That when a person lives their life as pure as they can live it, or as pious as they can live it, and does well by others, as I feel Muhammad Ali did. Look, he was married a few times, and his personal life is his personal life. But I get the overall feeling that most people, generally speaking, have a great deal of respect for him, irregardless of him changing religions or his political stances or things like that. That's not even in the forefront of anybody's mind with him most of the time. Now, I can't speak of people older than me, but I'm speaking from people of my age onward, that the man transcends whatever it may be, the politics or the religion, and that's why he is so loved around the world by everybody. And I remember I had a Muhammad Ali, actually a doll that had like a robe and the white trunks with the black trim and the Everlast gloves, and it was like maybe this high or whatnot, back in the late 70s. And I think I don't know if there was a thing in his back that you could push a button and like made the arms move or something, but it looked very real. When I was a kid, because newspapers used to have like iron-on things, like when he was fighting the Foreman or he was fighting the Frazier in the Thriller Manila. Like a Sunday newspaper would have like a pull-out iron-on. You could iron on a T-shirt or whatnot, the image. It would have like Ali's face with Frazier right up in his face and things like that. So I mean, even as a kid, I mean, you can't help but be just enraptured by this man's bravado and his personality. And I've lived in the Atlanta area, and I wasn't at the stadium when he at the Olympics at the opening ceremonies, but I saw it on TV and I went to the Olympics. And even 20 years ago, right now, when that was happening, he looked like he was in some rough shape. So it's a testament to him and his family that he's gone on this long, and it's a life that I think should be celebrated as gloriously as it has been. It's basically maybe even being understated at how important this man's life was to the world, let alone the world of boxing. All right, let's move on now to what fight that I wanted to preview and I didn't, which was Francisco Vargas versus Orlando Salido, as part of a doubleheader on HBO After Dark last week. And one of the things that I want to talk about is that's another one of these fights that, as I was watching it, I was almost like cringing, like watching it. I get the feeling these two guys need to stay away from each other because neither one of them likes to play defense. We knew that about Salido. And Vargas is a young, like they were trying to compare him to Arturo Gatti. He doesn't have Arturo Gatti's power to get him out of trouble. And both of them took abnormal amounts of punishment. And what it goes back to is, I think, what I was saying some number of years ago, and not to get off track, but anybody around the world, especially stateside, that has Showtime, notice that this year they've been doing SC30, which is Showtime Championship, SCB 30, I think, Showtime Championship Boxing 30-year anniversary, because it's their 30th anniversary of when they started showing championship boxing, back with like Donald Curry and Lloyd Hunnigan and Hagler and Mugabe and Richie Sandoval and Gabby Canizales, all back in 1986. This is the 30th, so they've been showing fights all throughout the years, and it's been great. And getting back to one of the fights I was just watching on there was the 4 fights. Was it 4 or 3? I think it was, the 4 fights with between Israel Vasquez and Rafael Marquez. And you remember me in a past video saying these two guys should stay far away from each other after, I think, the second fight. They fought 2 more times. I think it was after the third fight, when the one that went the distance, and and Vargas won in decision, I thought. But anyway, I was thinking to myself, these two guys are doing irreversible damage to each other, and they need to stay away from each other. Both of their careers went off the cliff after that fight. I know Marquez did well against Juan Ma Lopez, losing an 8th round stoppage, but for the most part, both their careers went off the edge of the cliff after that fight. The same thing's going to happen with these two. Salido, you would think, would be finished by now with all the fights he's been in, but Francisco Vargas is being ruined by this kind of high contact stuff. That's the kind of fighter he is. People pay to see that. I like seeing it. But when he is in against a guy who can give it as good as he can and can take it as good as he can, that's when the accumulated damage occurs. And I think the two of them should go their separate ways and stay away from each other. Just my opinion. As far as the fight was concerned, fantastic back and forth fight. Anybody who likes high contact and action like I do would love it. I was almost loving it so much I was almost cringing watching it. Personally, I thought Salido did enough to win the fight, barely. I think that you can make an argument that Vargas did enough to win the fight, and that the draw was absolutely the right decision, in my opinion. Like I said, I thought it could have been 7 rounds to 5 for Salido. I'm okay with it being a draw. I wouldn't have argued if it was 7 rounds to 5 with Vargas. I thought it was a great fight. I think the two of them should stay away from each other. That brings us to this week, in which HBO's got a doubleheader again from what I used to call the Felt Forum in New York. It's now called the Theater in Madison Square Garden, which I believe is under Madison Square Garden in the basement. The main event is going to be Roman Rocky Martinez of Puerto Rico, which is, I think, the big Puerto Rican Day parade is going on up there. And also Verdejo in the lightweight division is fighting also. I'm trying to get on to see the schedule, see if I'm missing something also while I'm doing this. But the main event is Roman Rocky Martinez versus Vasily Lomachenko in a kind of curious fight, because as I was making videos last year, or one or two of them last year, I was thinking to myself that one of the best fights out there that could be made was Nicholas Walters at featherweight against Vasily Lomachenko. And obviously Walters couldn't make featherweight anymore, so he's moved up to 130. Lomachenko was following him up there, and reports that I've read, not many of them, they're on what I call big national websites, was that Lomachenko was willing to give up some of his purse to make a fight work with Walters. And I'm guessing, I didn't hear this, I'm just assuming that Nicholas Walters turned down that deal because he was demanding a certain amount of money, and Bob Arum and Top Rank said the fight couldn't garner that much money. But Lomachenko had offered to pay, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of dollars to Walters to make the fight, and the fight didn't get made. I don't know if that was in jest or if that was for real or what the deal was. But in any event, Lomachenko's looking for a title fight, and he's got one against WBO champion Rocky Martinez. At first glance, I would think that this is a mismatch. And you ask, why? Martinez has beaten Salido, had a draw with Salido, and basically Salido's beaten Lomachenko. Let's back up. Lomachenko's had about 6 or 7 pro fights. He fought Salido in his second pro fight and lost a split decision, a contentious split decision. Nobody would have argued if they gave the fight to Lomachenko. Let's be clear about this. All right? Since then, Lomachenko's beaten Gary Russell Jr. And that's looking like an investment that was worthwhile. We're talking about a guy with 3 or 4 fights beating Gary Russell Jr., who's now at the top of the featherweight division. With this said, as I said before, at first glance, this looks like a mismatch, because Lomachenko is probably... it's hard to make a comparison to him, but he is very much a fighter who's a throwback 30 plus years ago, is very efficient with his power. He doesn't have the longest reach, but it seems like almost every punch he throws, he lands. He's highly efficient. And my dad used to call that, the first time I ever saw him, sat down and concentrated on a marvelous Marvin Hagler fight, I saw him fight against Tony Simpson of England. And I had seen Tony Simpson do massive damage on national TV before this fight and thought, this is going to be good. Hagler's in for it. Well, he brought out the very best in Marvin Hagler. And after the fight was over and Hagler stopped Simpson in 6 rounds, cut him up, knocked him down twice, beat him up pretty bad, I said to my dad, what's so special? It looks like he's just Hagler's quick and sharp. And my dad said, quick and sharp go a long way. And I was like, I guess 12 and a half when that happened, and I'm thinking to myself, looking at because it didn't look like he was doing anything special. He's right in front of Simpson. Lomachenko's right in front of you. The punches he throws are fast enough, but they connect. Now, they don't connect with the thudding force that Hagler's punches connected with. He doesn't have the professional experience marvelous Marvin Hagler has either. I'm not making a direct comparison to the two, but the way he punches and the efficiency with which he punches is a throwback to the Pryors, the Arguellos, the Haglers, the Leonards, and those guys. He's not as dynamic or flashy as them, and even in some cases Mayweather, if we're going to be honest with each other. But as I checked the schedule, I said, on paper, this looks like a mismatch. The problem being, fights aren't fought on paper. They're fought in the ring. And with this being said, Rocky Martinez is the naturally bigger, stronger boxer. And he does something I like. He initiates contact, and he scores a lot of knockdowns in his fights, which means he's initiating heavy contact. Now, that's going to either work for him, against him, or balance things out with Lomachenko, because he's going to be there to be hit. The knock on Lomachenko's been, it takes a long, grinding process, almost like Julio Cesar Chavez, to get a stoppage. I'm thinking Martinez is going to run into a shot more than once. And I think more highly of Lomachenko than I do of Mikey Garcia, who, after a rough start against Rocky Martinez, settled in and gave him a good beating. And I think this is going to be far worse, because Lomachenko, I think, fights in the pocket better than Mikey Garcia does, and is more dangerous with the efficiency of his punches from what I call inside the shoulders. They're very linear, and that usually tears up and destroys a fighter who is very round or arcing punches. And I look for that to be an interesting fight. As I said before, when I made the last video, that Vargas and Salido going into Martinez and Lomachenko, going into not Gary Russell, Victor Postol and Terence Crawford, we were going from the crudest end of the spectrum to the most technical end of the spectrum. Right now we're in the middle. So enjoy this, because it's going to be far more technical than what we saw last week, but it's going to be a little more cruder than what we're going to see in a few weeks with Crawford and Postol. June 10th, what are we talking about? The 12th or the 11th? Yep, Rocky Martinez. Felix Verdejo, who's being hailed as the new Puerto Riqueño star, is fighting Juan Jose Martinez in a 10-round lightweight fight. I saw his last fight against the Brazilian guy, and I was somewhat impressed. I don't know anything about Juan Jose Martinez, so this is more to showcase Verdejo's flashy skills, his speed, his power, his lateral movement, and we'll see where it's going. I wanted to see if Showtime had, and yesterday, Showtime Extreme, Ruslan Provatnikov is taking on John Molina Jr. And this is, again, going to be a case of Provatnikov being big and strong, and Molina not giving away anything on the willpower. I'm going to guess, not put much thought into this, that Provatnikov is going to prevail in this fight. Demetrius Andrade taking on Willie Nelson, not the singer. 12 rounds, WBC junior middleweight eliminator. I think I'm going to go with Andrade in that fight. Don't know how. I'm looking to see if anything else is going on of interest, and it does not look like it. And you can always find... One of the things I wanted to do also was find, like, This Week in Boxing and tell you guys, because I've been doing a lot of watching old fights from the 80s, fights that I didn't get to see that weren't televised in the United States and things like that. But and a lot of them that I did see. And last week, if I would have made a video, I would have told you to go back to, what was that, June, May 31st, May 30th, the week of May 31st, 1981, televised on TV, WBC super featherweight champion Cornelius Boza Edwards taking on Bobby Chacon in defense of a title he won from Bazooka Lamone. Chacon was an almost borderline all-time great. Boza Edwards was a very good fighter, much like Vargas and Salido, where he got into Vargas anyway. Tall, rangy guy that used to lead with his head and get into too many high-contact fights. That was his undoing. But Boza Edwards prevailed in this fight and stopped Bobby Chacon at the end of the 13th round. He didn't answer the bell for the 14th round. And KO Magazine used to do a thing where they'd recap a fight, and they'd do it round by round, where they'd have like a one-paragraph thing. And I remember, and they scored around who they thought would win the fight. They did that with this fight, and I remember very clearly a picture. I have it ingrained in my mind of Boza Edwards basically hitting Chacon with a straight left hand, and the picture looked just like this, where you can only see Boza Edwards' eyes above the punch, and Bobby Chacon's head was like thrown back in this black and white picture in KO Magazine when they recapped the thing. So if you get a chance, go back and watch that fight. I haven't had a chance to look at the calendar to see this week. Today's June the 9th. Give or take a day, because usually it was on Saturdays that they had fights like this. And I was trying to pull fights from when I first started watching boxing through the years, what I call the golden years in the 1980s. And that was one from last week. If I remember, I'll put whichever one would correspond with this week, whether it was 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 88, 90, whatever. I'll put it in the comments, and you guys can go find the fight and watch it, because I don't think I'm going to sit and watch these fights. And as I sit and watch them, before I know it, 14 rounds has gone by, and I've wasted 45 minutes. I'll try to dig up good fights for you guys to watch, to kind of share with you what I grew up with by just flipping on the TV. Not even with a remote control. I'm talking about pulling out a knob and then changing the channels by either a knob or by hitting buttons. The cable boxes were old. I think they had a knob on top of them too back then. So that's going to be it for this episode. Hopefully I can get back next week and do a recap of the Martinez and Lomachenko fight and preview for more upcoming stuff. Thanks, everybody.